Hello and welcome to the Table by Two podcast. This is the weekend Warhammer wrap-up, episode 2, where I will go over the 4-1 and 5-0 results from the weekend and pick out a few lists to discuss in detail. Here is the 4-1 and 5-0 results and ranked based on quantity. Number 1 is Lumineth Realm Lords. Incredibly strong. We talked about them last week. They just have so many tools. You can never count them out because of their runes, because of all their other stuff. Incredibly consistent and just incredibly good. Number 2 is Sylvaneth. We'll talk about them more in depth later as one of my lists that I've decided to highlight. Sylvaneth is solid. They've lost some of their tricks that they used to have, but they still have tricks, and they've shifted from a hit and run playstyle to a more tanky stand in place playstyle, but they still have some of those hit and run elements that they used to have that made them really strong. Next is Stormcast. We talked about them last week. You would think that Stormcast, being a battle tome that came out first, would make them suffer, right? That this would be a hindrance, but I think that they still have enough tools that they can compete in the current meta. Maybe it's that they're good at playing the current General's Handbook. We'll see when the next one comes out. I still really love Stormcast, and I am biased. I'm a Stormcast player, but I wouldn't feel bad about playing them these days. Daughters of Cain we talked about last week. Tons of damage, just an absurd amount of damage, and a lot of other stuff, but really strong. 2026 tomes, so all of those armies are really strong. Ogre Maw tribes are kind of surprising. Like, the indexes have sort of aged a bit, right? Especially with the new tomes. But ogres, their points are in the right spot and they have the right combination of rules that I think they can still do a lot. And I'll talk about them later. Blades of Khorne is an interesting one. They came out and they were sort of not great and not very well liked. But then the December Battle Scroll came out and they got the change to the Blood Drenched ability, which makes them a lot more consistent. And points on Khorne models have just gone down enough that now they're fitting a lot of stuff and they're doing really well. Maggotkin and Nurgle, 2026 tome, we'll talk about them later. Super strong. Just a lot of wounds, it's really hard to kill. Hellsmiths of Ashut are really interesting because they are the newest faction added to Age of Sigmar. That people don't know how they play, right? They're learning how they play. They're learning the sort of tempo of the army. We don't have years and years of data to back up an army like Hellsmiths. So they're very interesting. I'm going to talk about them more later because I think they're a fascinating army. Kharadron Overlords and Flesh Eater Courts are both very similar as top tier menace threats that have been nerfed quite a bit. KO more than Flesh Eater Courts at this point, but they're both still really good. You can get results with either of them, so just keep playing with them and have a lot of fun. I might talk about these guys in a future episode. Then we got Seraphon, an interesting army. The index is really showing its age. They really need a battle tome. They lack a cohesive faction identity and anything that's really fun or interesting. They're at a point where they're only good because stuff has become cheap enough that you can run enough of it. I really don't think Saurus Warriors should be as cheap as they are. And it's not because I think they should be more expensive, currently with their current War Scroll, but they need a War Scroll that is deserving of a model like that. And that goes for a lot of the range. But I will talk about Seraphon later because they are fascinating in a very small way. Tzeentch next is a 2026 battle tome. I don't need to say much more. Incredibly strong. Talked about them last week. Then we've got Ironjaws. It's Orc Summer, guys. It is, if you are an Orc player or on the fence about becoming an Orc player, now is the time. I think both Ironjaws and Kruleboyz are really strong. And they're just a lot of fun. Ironjaws just puts a lot of dudes on the board with decent saves and that hit really goddamn hard. Ironjaws are sweet. And finally, we've got a group of armies that all have 1-4-1. Idoneth, Cities, Skaven, Nighthaunt, Soulblight. I will not talk about these armies too much in depth. I don't think there's much point. This is more representative of a single player's like success, and I really want to congratulate their successes to getting a 4-1. But I'm not going to go in depth about each of these factions. I'll talk about them in a future episode, but they're all in a bit of a weird state. Idoneth is really relying on Scourge Gairan rules more than almost anyone, and I don't know how they're going to play post that. Cities of Sigmar are about to get a battle tome, so we'll see what happens. Skaven also, like Idoneth, relying on Scourge Gairan rules. We'll see where that lands. Nighthaunt, we talked about last week. Weird army. They are not very popular among among Nighthaunt players and among their fans because of the nerfs that happened to them in the transition from the index to the battle tome and the way the army plays now. People are finding it out. Maybe we'll see something pop out. And Soulblight they're Soulblight vampires or whatever. We'll see what happens with them. I've got not much to say on Soulblight. Onto the power picks. These are my meta-defining lists or whatever. But that sounds a little pompous, so they're just powerful lists that I want to talk about. First, we've got Nurgle. It's Taliban of Nurgle lists, like they all are. It's got Rodigus, Reinforced Plague Bearers, Poxbringer, Slaven Knights, Belga, Lord of Plagues, and 2 reinforced units of Rot Swords. It's a lot of wounds, right? 120 plus wounds on decent saves for a lot of them, ward saves. It's just tanky. It's a brick of dudes that you will not be able to punch through. And then they have disease, right? That's their battle trait. And so they'll disease you, and while you're diseased, at the end of every turn, you'll take D3 mortal wounds. And that is the key to Nurgle, is that everything is hard to kill, does enough damage, and disease will finish you off. It's really, really tough. And it's just really strong. Rodigus can also shut off your ability to heal or return slain models, which means you can't remove disease. You're diseased, and you're diseased forever if Rodigus gets his spell off. And then there's a few other things I'll talk about later. Belga is a priest and also makes Rodigus better at casting. The Nurgle prayer law has a really great mortal damage prayer as well that helps them push through damage. The Lord of Plagues is an incredible buff piece for Rot Swords. And Rot Swords are really tanky. 3-up saves, 5-up wards, possibly if they're next to the tree. Just a lot of wounds to chew through. Plague Bearers are similar, right? Their save isn't as good, but they get the 5-up ward at all times, and they're -1 to hit when they're on objectives. It's just very strong. I'll go through a couple rules now. First is Taliban of Nurgle, right? This is a key rule that you need to look out for from the start of the game, during deployment. They will get to disease a unit. And then when that unit spreads disease to other units, which spread is when they pick a diseased unit, and then they'll pick friendly other units of yours within 3 inches of them and spread disease to that. So the key is you have to make sure that your units are all more than 3 inches apart, so your opponent cannot spread between them. Because when they spread, they'll do additional mortal wounds. It really helps them get their disease train going very, very quickly. And in the games in which you forget about the Plague Progenitor, about spreading and all of that, you will almost certainly lose. It is a big thing that you need to learn to play around, and once you do, it'll make your Nurgle games at least a little bit easier. This is a key rule, and you need to look out for them. Keep your units 3 inches away from each other against Nurgle players. The Plague Progenitor will still hit. They can still start diseasing one of your units, but they're not going to get that additional spread damage. If you can put key units in reserve or stuff you don't want to get diseased in reserve, but most armies can't do that. It's more of a Stormcast thing. I'm talking to you guys, my Stormcast bros. Next is Fleshy Abundance. This is their unlimited spell, and it allows them to make their units -1 to wound for attacks that target them. That is the key. it's part of what makes Nurgle so tanky, is that while they've got 3-up saves and 5-up wards on units like Rot Swords, they've also -1 to wound. They just are really hard to chew through, and Fleshy Abundance is a key part of that. You can try and unbind it, but I just want to make you aware of it. It's part of the Nurgle strength, and it's part of their toolkit. Next, I'm going to move on to Ogres. Now, Ogres are an interesting faction. They're one of the indexes that's still kicking around, but they're still really strong, and they're really interesting, right? So, looking at the units here, they've got a Butcher, 2 reinforced Iron Guts, a Scourge-Garan Noblast Scrap Launcher, a Scourge-Garan Iron Blaster, a Slaughtermaster, 2 units of Gluttons, and a Noblast Scrap Launcher, the Scourge-Garan version, and then the Maw Pit. Really, what Ogres do so well is they put a decent amount of wounds on the table. That's part of it. Iron Guts do a lot of damage. I'll get to them later. And they have enough solid buffs and debuffs that they can get through, and some decent shooting and other stuff. So the Butcher gives them run and charge, right? It's very, very helpful. Run and charge is great, and it gives it to all their infantry units, which means they can get into combat more easily and more efficiently. Then you've got the gruesome trophies on the Butcher, which gives them an aura of +1 to hit against heroes and monsters, which is really good as well. You know, those tend to be things that you might want to kill, you know, especially if your opponent has a big hero monster, such as Karazai or Be'lakor or Archaon or whatever. Being able to be a +1 to hit against things like that is really important, and just generally it's a nice thing to have. The other ability I want to bring up on the Butcher is the Mage Swallower. It's a 6-inch aura of -1 to ward rolls, which is incredibly strong. A lot of units rely on their ward rolls for their tankiness, such as previously discussed, Nurgle. And being able to make that worse, being able to make wards worse, is an incredibly strong ability. Then the Slaughtermaster is interesting. If your Ogre units kill your enemy units, he gains points, and you can spend those points to give your units either +1 attack or 5-up wards, right? You either make your units tankier or hit harder. Then you've got 3 shooting units in the Scrap Launchers and the Iron Blasters. I'll talk about Iron Guts in a second. And then Gluttons, which are just decent wounds to sit on objectives. Moving on to Iron Guts. So the one thing you've got to look out for with Iron Guts is the down to the Iron Guts ability. It gives them fight twice. And they have really great attack profile here. 3 attacks at Ren 2, damage 3. They also can get extra attacks from either the Slaughtermaster, or there's an unlimited spell that gives them extra attacks, which means they just hit really hard, right? And getting to fight twice, and they have a lot of health on a good save. It's just, they're really, really strong, and they're really scary combined with this next ability, which is the Moorpath Menaces. So in the enemy charge phase, I'll pick an Ogre infantry unit that is not in combat to be the target. And they'll roll a dice, and on a 3-up, they get to move a number of inches equal to the roll. And it can end that move in combat. Now, the key part of this is that A gives you extra movement, right? Every single enemy turn, you'll get to move a unit an additional D6 inches. If they roll a 3-up, obviously. But then also, it's effectively a free counter charge. So they get to just get a lot of movement. They can get into combats that you really didn't want them to be in. Then your Iron Guts could fight twice. It just gets you a lot of board presence with that ability. Ogres are an army that puts a lot of wounds on the table. They can also get a lot of additional control. And they just beat people up real hard. They brawl in the mid-board better than almost anyone. They're really strong. Keep a lookout for them. Next is Sylvaneth. Sylvaneth are a new battle tome. I'm not going to speak too much on everything here, but just a brief overview. You've got Alariel the Ever Queen, 2 units of Dryads, reinforced Kurnoth Hunters with great swords, Spite Revenants, a Warsong Revenant, Spirit of Durthu, and Drycha Hammerdreth. In this section, I'll talk about Kurnoth Hunters, right? Kurnoth Hunters with great swords are just a solid hammer. That's it, right? They've got decent attacks, they've got crit mortals, damage 2. They're pretty good. And Kurnoth Hunters are really great now because they're -1 to Rend when they're wholly in the Overgrown. Now, the Overgrown is Sylvaneth's unique mechanic. Their trees, the wildwoods that they set up, will then spread the Overgrown to other pieces of terrain. It's very hard for you to deny that, especially some of the early levels of the Overgrown. So the more tokens they have out there, the bigger the Overgrown's going to be. But while they're in the Overgrown, they get certain buffs. And Kurnoth Hunter's buff is that they get -1 to Rend. So they're just pretty tanky at that point, right? They're sort of Rockgut-esque in that way. The Warsong Revenant can also make it -1 to wound against them with one of your prayers. Then you've got Dryads and Spite Revenants, which just stand on bodies, but you can recur models to them at the end of turn. You can also recur units at half strength. So it's really good. Dryads are -1 to hit and wound while they're in the Overgrown. You're pretty tanky. Like, Sylvaneth's pretty tanky, especially with all your healing and your model recursion and all that. And on top of that, you've got a run and charge spell, and you can just get in and beat people's face up, right? Drycha's got a really unique ability that allows her to teleport into combat. So you can sort of charge out of overgrown pieces of terrain. And then also the Spirit of Durthu. The Realm Root Guide allows him to teleport, and Glamour Weave gives him reroll hits, wounds, and saves. And one of the abilities on his War Scroll is that when he charges, he can get +2 to charge if he charges into a combat that has another hero. And so Drycha can do a teleport charge in, then Durthu can join her, and that's a pretty potent pair that does a lot of damage. And I want to highlight a couple things here with this list. First is Alariel. This is only a portion of Alariel's abilities. She does a lot for this list. Firstly, she is an incredibly hard to kill combat monster, right? If Alariel does not get downed in one combat, she will not die. She will heal all her wounds back, and then it will be like you've done nothing. And she does a lot of damage as well. But the two abilities I want to focus on is the Goddess of Life and the Seasons of War. The Goddess of Life allows her to come back with 8 damage points allocated to her. So if she dies, you get another one. It's incredibly strong, right? You've got your best unit in your army, and you get it again. And the 8 damage points don't really matter because you heal D3 at the end of turn and 2d6 at the next hero phase. And then it's like it never happened. Moving on to the Seasons of War ability. So you get to pick one of these abilities that lasts for the rest of the battle round. And I'm not going to go over each ability, but they're just really strong, right? Each ability just makes your army better. And you get them for free with your cool-ass combat monster that's a 3-cast wizard and does a lot of stuff. Alariel is not necessary, but is really awesome if you want to take her. Really cool. Sylvaneth is doing great. Really cool stuff. Move on to the next thing is the Strike First, right? This is part of their battle traits. It's one of their commands. And so they can pick a Sylvaneth within the Overgrown, and there's combat with only one enemy unit, and they get Strike First for the rest of the turn. This happens in the enemy combat phase. This means that you need to be charging Sylvaneth units with at least 2 friendly units. Otherwise, they will get Strike First, and they will hit you back. And a lot of their units do a lot of damage, right? Kurnoths, Alariel, Durthu, Drycha, all do really great damage. So you really need to be charging with 2 units. I know that's hard. That is the point. But sometimes you might have to sacrifice your foot hero or use him more aggressively than you would normally so that you can then get your combat in and your opponent won't get strike first. It's much better to lose your 100-point wizard than to lose half your 500-point hammer unit. That's Sylvaneth. On to my picks. I've picked 2 lists here that I want to quickly touch on. First is this Seraphon list. It's ridiculous. It's got Skink Star Priest, 3 spawns of Chotek, a Stegodon Chief, an Engine of the Gods, 2 spawn of Chotek, a Scourge-Garan Old Blood, a Stegodon Chief, an Engine of the Gods, and 2 spawns of Chotek. That is 7 spawns of Chotek. And then, an additional Skink Star Priest on top of that, sorry. 7 spawns of Chotek, 5 Stegodons. It falls into what I like to refer to as the shark effect. The shark effect refers to a list at the end of 3rd edition that Idoneth Deepkin would run, which was 9 Achillean Allopexes. And the strength of that list was that when you have so many little units, it can be hard for your opponent to deal with them because target allocation and splitting attacks can be awkward. And as everyone who's played AOS for any amount of time will know, whenever you split attacks, it almost never goes well. And very often you'll fail to kill one or both of the things that you were trying to fight because you've split your attacks. And this list follows a similar principle of just having a lot of weird little guys that get to move around the board and were kind of annoying to kill. The spawns of Chotek are really easy to kill, but then you've got your Stegodons, which just do a little bit of impact mortals on the charge, do not much damage, but a 14 health on a 4-up save, so they take at least a little bit to kill. And then on top of that, you've got Engine of the Gods, which can heal the spawns of Chotek. Your Skink Star Priest can also be healing them with the spell Lore of the Primal Jungles, or Primal Energy has got Emerald Lifestorm in it, which can heal. And sorry, your guys are actually 16 health on a 4-up save because of the battle formation. I forget. I digress. The point is, you have a bunch of weird little dudes that get to move around the board and possibly win you the game through scoring. You're not killing much of your opponent's army, but you might be able to avoid them and play keep away for enough to win a game. Or 4 in this case. This is the spawn of Chotek's War Scroll. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You can pause and read it or whatever. But it is just that you have a shooting attack, right? You have the Glob of Flame Acid, which does D3 plus 3 damage. And if they do any damage, will -1 to save for the enemy unit. And if you have enough spawns of Chotek, you will do a point of damage probably. And get that -1 to save roll. And then maybe their other shooting will be better. Or maybe the Stegodons will do a little more damage. And maybe with enough of these things, you'll do something. This spawn of Chotek list has been hurt by the changes to the auxiliary rules that were introduced in the previous battle scroll. But overall, strong list. A little weird. That's why it's one of my picks. Finally is Hellsmiths of Ashut. This is the Tars Grand Fortress Army of Renown. I have a lot of opinions on Army of Renowns. I'll do a future podcast on them. But what it's got is it's got Uruk-Tar, 2 Deathstreaker rocket batteries, a Dominator engine with Bane maces, reinforced Infernal Razors with blunderbusses, an Ashen Elder, Dominator engine with immolation cannons, reinforced cohort with spears, a Scourge-Garan War Despot, which is very important, a Dominator engine with immolation cannons, and another reinforced unit of cohort with spears. In Armies of Renown, you always sacrifice the base army's rules to get these new and interesting rules from the Army of Renown, right? And usually they have a reduced roster. In this case, you don't get any of the Bull Centaurs, which I know some people are big fans of. The Bull Centaurs, some people really hate them. If you hate them, this is for you, I guess. Taj Grand Forge Host tends to be a more shooting-focused version of Hellsmiths. You can see that in this list with double rocket batteries, 2 Dominator engines with cannons, and you just have a lot of shooting, some decent wounds with the cohort. It's very interesting and very weird. And I'm going to go straight into my picks or my sort of rules that I want to highlight. So first, you got the battle traits here. Each battle round, you'll get a cumulative stacking buffs, similar to the way DOK used to use their Blood Rights or Ideneth with their Tides. I know both of those have changed, but this is similar, right? And from Battle Round 2, your unit's weapons are all going to get crit 2 hits. And that includes your shooting profiles. And then the rest of those abilities are fine. They all make your stuff better and better, right? Your army becomes a little better, a little better, a little better. Also, you get to recur your units at half strength, which really helps with your blunderbusses, which are an incredibly important unit, incredibly powerful unit, but can be quite squishy, and being able to get 5 more of them is quite strong. Giving your war machines a 6-up ward is just fine, especially in this list that runs 3 Dominator engines, which all have a 2-up save. So giving a 2-up save and a 6-up ward makes them reasonably tanky. For a unit like that, you've got to think about their tankiness, not so much as they will survive every single hit that is sent at them, and more that your opponent has to send something at them that will be able to kill them. In a way that you could think about a Dominator engine on an objective compared to a unit of like Clan Rats. Your opponent could send almost anything into the Clan Rats and they're probably going to kill them. Or at least possibly win the brawl. But with a Dominator engine, your opponent can't send anything because they're just not going to be able to crack that 2-up save. They need to send something that will be able to crack it. So that's something you got to be aware of. I also wanted to highlight one of their prayers that I thought was really cool and really interesting. They have one priest, and if they chant this, they get to do mortal wounds into an enemy unit anywhere on the battlefield, and they've got this thing where they'll roll 6 dice. For each 6, they get additional enemy targets. So they have the opportunity to do little chip damage to a lot of units across the board. And combined with the shooting from the immolation cannons, from the blunderbusses, from the Destrica rocket batteries, which are really solid into monsters. You got to be really careful with monsters if you're going into Destrica rocket batteries, because they can shred. They're really solid. So yeah, that's the battle traits and one of the prayers. The War Despot from Scourge of Iran is the key that brings this all together. Part of the main rules of Hellsmiths is they get these things called demonic power points, and they get to place them on units, and they make their units better depending on how many points they have. Now, that whole mechanic doesn't exist in the Army of Renown. Your only way to get points is through cohort with spears. They can give things points if you roll a dice. But that doesn't really work. That's really slow and hard to get off. With the War Despot, if he has any points, your units count as having 1 point while they're wholly within 9 inches of this guy. So, if you can get him a point with your cohort with spears, then everything around him will act as if they have a point. And that aura can become bigger if he gets more and more points. So that's really it. His other ability is fine, but what really matters is that he gives out an aura of points, which makes all your units better. It gives your Dominator engines extra attacks. It gives your blunderbusses extra rend. It gives your cohort award. It's not full strength. Within the base book, your sweet spot for points is 2 points on each unit, which you can't do with a War Despot. It only gives them a single point. But still, with all the other rules the Army of Renown gets, I think it offsets. And clearly, people have been taking this Army of Renown to a lot of success. This list is sweet. Hellsmiths is a sweet army with some sweet models. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody. This was the Weekend Warhammer wrap-up. I'll be back next week to talk about some more lists. If there's anything else you want me to talk about, put it in the comments below. But that's it. Thanks for watching.